Welcome to the Sid Richardson Museum. We are delighted to have you joining us tonight for our special lecture titled A Misdeal in the Movies, Frederic Remington, John Ford, and the Birth of the Cinematic West. This evening, we'll explore the fascinating intersection of Western art and early cinema. Drawing from the museum's current exhibition titled The Cinematic West, The Art That Made the Movies, tonight's lecture traces the journey of Frederic Remington's painting, A Misdeal, from its appearance in John Ford's 1918 silent Western film to its place in the private collections of Hollywood legends Douglas Fairbanks and Hal Wallis. And then beyond this singular work, we'll also be talking in a broader context at how Remington's art influenced early silent films, and it really helped establish the visual language that would define the Western genre for generations of filmmakers to come. Our speaker tonight is Scott Winterrowd, our director of the Sid Richardson Museum and curator of the Cinematic West exhibition. Since joining the museum in 2019, Scott has brought a rich background in art museum education and curation, with experience at institutions including the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, the Dallas Museum of Art, the J. Paul Getty Museum, and the Meadows Museum. He has developed educational and interpretive materials for exhibitions on major artists, ranging from Goya and Picasso to Thomas Moran and Frederick Edwin Church. A native of Fort Worth and a practicing artist himself, Scott brings a unique artist perspective to his work, enriching our understanding of Remington, Russell, and the art of the American West. And with that, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Scott Winterrowd.
Excuse the mic, pass off. All right. Well, thank you all for coming this evening, and I'm happy to have you all with us tonight. And my talk tonight is focused on, as Leslie's already told you, the painting that is the centerpiece of this exhibition, A Misdeal. And it's kind of been the impetus for looking at this as a subject to examine the collection here at the Sid Richardson through. And I'm not exactly a Hollywood movie historian. I'm really an art historian and art educator. But I have delved in as deeply as I can this last year, and this particular story has been quite fascinating to me. So I hope you will enjoy it as well. And if you have lots of questions at the end, I'd be happy to entertain those, because I've narrowed this down as best as I can. It's a sprawling, kind of crazy story in some respects. But Remington, by the time he created A Misdeal, oh, go ahead and let's move, sorry. We've now hit a technical snafu, so I'm gonna have to say next when we're ready for a new slide. So excuse me about that while I get used to that. But Remington, by the time he created A Misdeal, he was both writing his own stories and illustrating them for periodicals such as Harper's Weekly, but he was also, of course, illustrating the work of other writers for those same magazines. While this particular painting was not made as an illustration, and it is not exactly connected to any story, the painting itself conjures up an open-ended narrative of a card game gone wrong. What exactly has happened is not clear. One might assume that the man standing at center is the one who has cheated and has taken retribution, but he doesn't seem to be holding any weapon, leaving any clear storyline in question. The looks of the only two men still standing in the room draw our attention to the door, flooded with daylight, and a bystander peering in. The room is filled with dissipating gun smoke and wounded card players. This pre-cinematic scene served as a prototype for so many barroom brawls featured repeatedly in Hollywood Westerns. And the painting was made around 1897. It is not dated. There's no date on the painting, but the ascribed date comes from it being reproduced in the first published book of Remington's art. It's a book called Drawings, and it was published by R.H. Russell. And A Misdeal was featured in the book, but it was also sold as one of a series of prints you could buy in addition to the book. And an interesting thing to note that will appear when we see it in film in a moment is that for some reason, when it was reproduced at a much lighter tone than what we see in the oil painting. Oh, next. Told you it was going to take me some time to get used to that. Remington also made two other works on paper that featured barroom scenes in 1897, and these were both made as part of a series of illustrations he made for Alfred Henry Lewis's book Wolfville. I don't see any direct correlation to what we see in a misdeal, but I do find it interesting to see these two images, particularly the one on the right, because it bears a lot of characteristics that we have in the oil painting that we have on view in the show. But of course, these are actually much smaller drawings. These are ink wash drawings. These would have been what Remington would have produced many, many times because it's much more rapid to produce than an oil painting and not on the same scale. Next slide. In 1918, interestingly enough, just less than a decade after Remington's death in 1909, the painting appears as a starting point of action in John Ford's film Hell Bent, starring Harry Carey. In the opening sequence, a writer receives a letter requesting that when he's creating his next story, he should make the hero a more ordinary man, as bad as he is good. The public is already tired of such men in novels who embody every virtue. Everyone knows that such people do not exist. And you see in the slide on the left, the author, what he does in the film is folds up the letter, he rises thoughtfully from his chair, and he walks over to a framed image of a misdeal. And here you can see he's looking at the image. Interestingly enough, that's not actually the print of a misdeal. It's already the recreation that we see that's going to happen in the film. As he considers the message, the camera moves in on the painting to frame Remington's composition more closely, and the action comes to life with the next intertitle reading, "What Happened?" While the characters attend to the central figure standing shot and holding his chest, another intertitle reads, "The stranger says there was cheatin'." Harry Carey's character, the presumed cheat, Cheyenne Harry, then gallops across the dunes in an escape that sets up his storyline as the requested good-bad hero. And I didn't want to try to deal with getting the clip in here, and plus it always feels painfully long when we watch it together for 3 minutes. But one can easily find Hellbent on YouTube, and so I do encourage you to take a look at it. The film was considered lost for many, many years, but it was found in the late 20-teens in the National Film Archive in the Czech Republic, and it was remastered in 2020. So its recent finding was really crucial to us being able to tell the story of the inclusion of the painting in this early John Ford film. Next slide. Now, we don't know exactly where Ford got the idea of staging a Remington painting as the kickoff to action in this film. He may have taken the inspiration from his brother, Francis Ford, who had introduced John to the industry. Francis was himself a director and actor, and funny enough, he directed and starred in this particular film that we're seeing the advertisements for. And in the year prior to John Ford making Hellbent, Francis Ford had created a film of Remington's only novel and play, John Erman of the Yellowstone. And this is today a lost film, and really these advertisements from the cinema magazines from the time were the only images I could find that relate to what's left of this particular film. Next slide. Now, John Ford's career began in small acting parts in films in around 1914, but by 1917 he was directing short films. It was with the film The Soul Herder that Ford began working partnership with the actor Harry Carey, creating a string of 25 westerns over the next 4 years. And I just wanted to bring this in because this is an image of Harry Carey's ranch in Saugus, California, where they're actually shooting a film in this image. With the next slide. Ford's first feature-length film was Straight Shooting. It was made with Carey, and it was also Carey who arranged for Ford to meet Charles Russell at the Saugus Ranch in 1924. And this was around the time that Ford was working on the film The Iron Horse, which is a historical drama about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And nothing is known of what was exactly exchanged during that meeting, but I think it's particular to note that these two visual storytellers working in slightly different visual media had a moment to connect on one of Russell's winter visits to Southern California. And I know with the way that we've kind of framed this lecture, we are talking mostly about Remington because it's focused around a misdeal and its role. But I think it's equally as important to recall that Russell spent time in Southern California in the last 6 years years of his life. He was there all those last 6 winters and got to know a lot of the Hollywood actors. He had actually already met most of them prior to going out there. But I think, his influence, and John Ford states that Russell was just as important to him as Remington whenever he was visualizing some of his most important films. Next slide. Our exhibition does make a nod to Ford's breakthrough Western, Stagecoach, and that's the film that raised the Western from B-movie status to A grade, and of course elevated John Wayne to A-list stars. It also is the film that used for the first time a backdrop that would become ubiquitous with the West, Monument Valley, Arizona. Ford would use the striking buttes of the Colorado Plateau as a setting for 9 of his famous Westerns. And when you see our exhibition, we've, of course, paired the Stagecoach poster that we borrowed from the Academy Museum with our own painting, A Taint on the Wind. And we were also very fortunate to be able to borrow from a private collection this painting by Oscar Burninghouse, Movie Night at Taos Theater, which coincidentally was made in the same year as Stagecoach in 1939. So I think it's kind of funny that Burninghouse took Stagecoach as his subject for the moviegoers that are watching the film here. And of course, 1939 is such an important year for movies, a banner year with Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, and many others. But it's just kind of an interesting staging point for our exhibition with these 3 works. And on the next slide, I just wanted to bring some of these images in because Remington and Russell didn't really paint Monument Valley. At times they painted things that were somewhat similar, but we've tried to kind of bring that in because it's one of those visualizations that I think really has become synonymous with the West. And so I'm just mentioning a few things here, like the image on the left, of course, is a still from Stagecoach. And then this is Ford and his crew filming in Monument Valley on the right. And I believe this is from The Searchers. And the next slide. And just as Ford would utilize a Remington painting like a Misdeal as a start of action for his motion narrative in Hellbent, it's very telling of the later acknowledgments that the director would make of the influence both Remington and Russell's art had on his films. And Ford said, when I did She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, I tried to have the cameras photographic as Remington would have sketched it and painted it. It came out very beautifully and was very successful in this respect. And I just paired 2 images here. This is not actually She Wore a Yellow Ribbon on the left. It's from Fort Apache, but I think the visualization and the staging kind of does speak volumes to what Ford was really thinking about when he was creating his visuals. And he's such a striking director in terms of the way that he frames things in his films. Next slide. Now, we're going to shift a little bit away from John Ford, although he'll pop up again here and there, because what was so interesting is not just that we had access to the painting of Misdeal and that it was in a John Ford film, but that the fact that the early provenance of a Misdeal led us down a totally different path. The painting was exhibited at Hart and Watson's Gallery in Boston in conjunction with the release of that book that I mentioned, Drawings, in 1897. And the painting then went to a gallery, I believe, in Albany, New York, from what I've been able to determine. And as I mentioned, I just want to remind everyone, there was a set of prints that were circulated as well. And this is really how the general public saw these, through reproduction. But interestingly, the painting itself wound up in the collection of silent film star Douglas Fairbanks. And so, and Fairbanks at the time was working on a number of Western movies. Next slide. So another possible influence on John Ford's decision to use a Remington painting in Hellbent may have been Fairbanks' use of a different Remington painting, in this case, his first lesson from the Amon Carter Museum, which was used in the 1917 film Wild and Woolly. And so you can see over on the left the still from the film where they're recreating the scene from his first lesson. Not totally faithfully. We were losing our gait and we don't have the horse's hoof hung up there. But nonetheless, what happens in the scene, it's really a fantasy sequence where Fairbanks imagines himself in the painting and then jumps on the horse and bucks around the corral. And it's over very quickly, and you can see it in the exhibition. And again, it's easy to find online to be able to see this fun little reference point, again, back to a Remington painting in film. And it was also wonderful that we were able to borrow a very early silent Western movie poster for the exhibition in this particular case. Next slide. Fairbanks would go on to create his final Remington tableau in film in the opening sequences of The Mollycoddle, a film that was made in 1920. And in that story, Fairbanks's character's father was, as you can see over here in the inner title, a leather-necked, shag-gutted buckaroo, gamely waging an uneven battle near a coveted waterhole such as Remington knew. And here Fairbanks has recreated Remington's 1903 painting in this tableau that we see in the still down here for the fight for the waterhole, which is also known, of course, as an Arizona waterhole. And I was really surprised. I had just been reading about the Mollycoddle, which is a pretty crazy film where it talks a lot about Fairbanks and the stunts that he would perform himself and how injured he became on the film. So I thought, well, I should watch this. And of course, the opening sequences are talking about how Fairbanks's character in the movie, he's a guy, a very civilized guy who's living in Monte Carlo, who's going to find his way back to the West and find his way back to his Western roots in the film. But the opening really begins with this tableau, and I was immediately like, oh my gosh, here it is again, where he's referenced a Remington painting so directly, which is super fun. I would say too, the idea came to us from a biography that was written in 2016 of Fairbanks, that he owned a group of works by Remington, because it's noted that there was a fire at Fairbanks's house before he and Mary Pickford got together and moved into Pickfair, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there was a fire at the house, and there were Remingtons in his collection that were damaged. I spent a day at the Herrick Library at the Academy Museum, and Betsy Thomas, who's our Education Resources Director here at the museum, spent a day and a half. We both sifted through all those papers, and we've never been able to find the paperwork that could tell us exactly when Fairbanks purchased a Misdeal or when he started collecting Remingtons. We found a lot of other information I'll be talking about as I go along in this lecture, but it would be wonderful for us to really be able to piece together 1897 up until the late 1920s. But we hope one day we'll find more information about that early period of this. But we are certain by 1933 that the picture was in the collection of Douglas Fairbanks. If you'll move to the next slide. And I know it was rather unbelievable to me the day that we figured this out, because we were looking through a sale of contents of Pickfair. I think it was held around 2012. And I was digging through all these photos, and I was scouring them, and suddenly I saw these photos in the center, and I realized there's this woman standing here, and look, there's a painting. And as I zoomed in on it and it became super pixelated, I realized there's a Misdeal. Next slide. We were able to get a better image of this at some cost. So we could actually, yeah, they weren't too easy on us, even though we were like, we're an education institution. But it was wonderful to be able to get this picture. So it actually is Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. dressed in Western garb, because they are having a party to celebrate the brand new saloon she had just installed in the basement at Pickfair. She bought a saloon out of New Mexico to surprise Douglas Fairbanks and to hang the Western art collection that he had been creating in. And there's a bunch of news stories. I'm not going to go into all this right now, but Fairbanks and another actor were out in New Mexico, out around Lordsburg. They said in those articles that he was looking for a saloon or a place that he could house his Western art collection. It's very, very odd, very confusing, but there's a lot of news stories about this out there. But of course, the saloon was at Pickfair, and I just want to mention Pickfair was such an important place in Hollywood at that time, because it was a place everyone gathered. It was known as the White House of the West. And dignitaries, anyone, all the major actors, of course, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks were very close with Charlie Chaplin, and they say he had his own room at Pickfair. And they had quite an art collection. Even Adolph Wyman's Rising Sun is noted in this, or shown in this postcard that we see here. So it was really the place to be in Hollywood in that time period. And of course, as you all may know or may not know, Pickford and Fairbanks and Chaplin were the founders of United Artists. And so right at the end of their silent movie career, they were still super important to what was happening in Hollywood in that time. So next slide. This is a group of paintings that we do know were in Douglas Fairbanks' collection. There's a number of things that are noted and listed, like he had a painting by Frank Tenney Johnson. I've not been able to figure out what that painting is. Tenney Johnson was already working out in the Los Angeles area by the time that Fairbanks was really big, so it's quite likely he did have that. But we do know that he owned the Remington Father Marquette Discovering the Mississippi, not a terribly Western-looking picture, although I understand the Western context there. William Herbert Dunton, the painting that you see up at the upper right, is today in the Denver Art Museum and was definitely part of Douglas Fairbanks' collection. And then, of course, on the lower left is a painting by Charles Russell that interestingly enough went into Fairbanks and Pickford's collection in 1921. And it's a fun story because when they went to purchase it, Mary Pickford went to Nancy Russell and said, "I'd really like to purchase this painting as a surprise for Doug." And then Douglas went to Charlie Russell and said, "I'd really like to purchase this painting as a surprise for Mary." And it became a whole big confusing mess. And with the next slide, oh, I should say, we know that Russell and Nancy Russell met Douglas Fairbanks on the set of The Three Musketeers in 21. And so this is what kind of led up to the purchase of the painting. And with the next slide, I'll get on with my letter story. The letter that we have reproduced in the exhibition on the left is a letter from Mary Pickford to Nancy Russell, where she talks about the whole kerfuffle about who bought what. And all's well that ends well is a fun part of the letter, but it also states that the painting hung in the entrance hall at Pickfair for everyone to enjoy that came in. So we didn't get the Navajos as part of this exhibition, but we were able to borrow this wonderful letter from Russell to Douglas Fairbanks, where he talks about meeting him as D'Artagnan on the set of Three Musketeers, and then chides him, of course, to remember the Westerns and to go back to his Western, making Western movies the way he did in the late 19-teens. Of course, Fairbanks didn't go back to making Westerns, but nonetheless, Russell tried. Russell then also made this portrait of him as D'Artagnan in bronze that was given to him as a gift. This isn't the gift that was given directly to Fairbanks. This is another copy of that bronze that's in the Amon Carter's collection today. Next slide. An interesting part of this story is that Fairbanks and Pickford divorced in 1936, and she remarried Charles Rogers, or Buddy Rogers, as he's known. And evidently, Fairbanks kept his art collection with him when he moved out of Pickfair, because in the early 1940s, Mary Pickford went out and bought a clutch of Remingtons to put in the Western Saloon in the house. And this is a reproduction from 1973 of an article about the lost Pickfair Remingtons. And this was a really interesting part of this story. Early on, before we'd gone out to the Herrick Library, we found this list of works that were in Mary Pickford's collection. And one of them included a card game. It's not this painting that you see here, but we'll show it in just a moment. So I was very confused as to what this was, because I could tell there was some sort of question about the authenticity of the Pickfair Remingtons in this particular case. But what's also very interesting, and you can actually see an image of the saloon down at the bottom with some of the paintings hanging in it. And these are all black and white images that have a Western theme, of course. But there's certain elements of them that just are not very Remington, even though when I look closely at them, they've been signed Frederic Remington. Frederic Remington, it's probably somewhere in this one too. But so somebody went to some trouble to sell Mary Pickford some Remingtons. Can we go next slide? There's the card game on the left. And one of the things that's not typical of Remington's work at all is there's a lot of women in these paintings. And one of the things that's really fascinating in the center painting, you'll see this is the way the painting looks today, and it's got a fake Frederic Remington signature down in the lower right. But missing from the painting is the girl that used to be in it in the illustration that we can see. So somebody went to great lengths to make these more Remington-like, to sell them off. And strangely enough, Mary Pickford traveled these paintings around to Southern California museums, and they were shown as Remingtons for many years. It wasn't until the 1960s a visitor got to go to Pickfair, and he saw these works, and I think she had expressed dismay over the fact that there was some question about them. So he wrote to Harold McCracken, who was the director, the first director and the person that built the Whitney Art Gallery at the Buffalo Bill Cody Center in Cody, Wyoming. And he got a response back from McCracken, says, "I've seen these paintings and they're not Remington." It turns out they're from John Marchand. John Marchand was a friend of Charlie Russell's, and when Russell first went to New York in 1904, he actually spent time working in Marchand's studio. So it's really quite fascinating how this whole story kind of plays out, and interesting enough that poor Mary Pickford didn't wind up with any Remingtons in her collection. Next slide. Now, Douglas Fairbanks only lived 3 more years after the divorce from Mary Pickford. He remarried to Lady Ashley, Sylvia Ashley, a woman who was married numerous times in her life. She married Clark Gable after she was through with Fairbanks. And after her divorce with Clark Gable, she decided to part with a misdeal. And she sold the painting in 1953 to movie producer Hal Wallis. And so the story just shifts a little bit in Hollywood, and the painting stays right there in the center of Hollywood history. Interestingly enough, the Navajos painting that I showed you earlier by Russell, that stayed in Douglas Fairbanks Jr.'s collection until around 1980. And today it's in the Desert Caballeros Museum outside of Phoenix, Arizona. But for Hal Wallis, just want to say a little bit about Wallis and his work, which of course, he's the force behind, he's the movie producer behind The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, and of course, True Grit. Here we see him on the right with his second wife, Martha Heyer. He was the man that made Elvis's movies, and he was behind the Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis combo. So just really important movie producer throughout the later part of the 20th century, mid to later 20th century. And next slide. Wallis, whenever he first started buying his Remingtons, he had them on view at his Van Nuys estate. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure. Actually, we missed a slide. This one, something's missing. Okay, I was like, whoa. So Wallis's collection was built from 1953 to 1958, and he bought 7 works by Remington. One of them I have not been able to identify. It's supposed to be a watercolor, and the title isn't jiving with what's actually in the catalogue raisonné. So, and that's not uncommon. It was kind of hard to track down Pursuing the Indians and the work up at top, which I'm going to forget the name of. But these are a group of works, presumably by Remington. There is some question about the pastel that you see over on the left, which was actually included as a reproduction in a series of lithographs that were circulated that is known as A Bunch of Buckskins. And we have one of those in our collection here at the Sid Richardson, a Sioux Chief, which is different than this one. But he had a really nice group of Remingtons, including a Misdeal. Sorry, there were 8 actually. I'm sorry, because a Misdeal is not in this group. I just misspoke. But he did have a wonderful nocturne ghost stories in his collection as well. But he was buying all of these at the same time that he was creating Gunfight at OK Corral. And he said of thinking about these things, he was talking about a cinematographer. Lang specialized in clean, sharp-edged photography with extraordinary depth of focus. I wanted the picture to have the burned-out brown look of a Remington painting, and Lang gave it to me. Remington has always been a favorite painter of mine, and today several of his finest works hang on the walls of our Palm Springs house. So this is a late quote by Hal Wallis. But earlier on, with the next slide, I'll just say that the Remingtons in the 1950s would have hung at Wallis's Van Nuys estate. And this estate has been carved up today. It doesn't exist at all anymore. There's actually a middle school that was built on it. Part of it was taken by the state. But the home was really a place away from the movies for Hal Wallis. And it was not a place where it was kind of a movie-centric place out in the valley. Only on certain occasions in the Blue Room, as they called it, which bore no resemblance to a theater until Wallis was ready to screen the rushes of his films or entertain his family and friends with a weekend movie. Then it was magic time. The Frederic Remingtons came down from the wall, revealing a projection booth. The press of a button activated a hydraulic lift, causing the screen to emerge from beneath the floor. And so really what the Blue Room was a den, but it had a hidden movie theater in it behind the Remington paintings, which I think is pretty hilarious and probably not great for the Remington paintings to be coming up and down on the walls all the time. But hey, I interestingly enough, as I was going through all this and doing crazy internet searches, the article in the next slide popped up. I saw this on the right. Wallis finds way to get art in film. And so in 1961, while working on a Dean Martin feature, Wallis put all of his Remingtons, plus some that he borrowed, into Dean Martin's Shirley MacLaine film, All in a Night's Work. Would you go to the next slide? And here is Shirley MacLaine admiring Martin's characters, Remingtons. In this case, as she says, is she standing in front of it? Oh, the card game. It's like an old friend to me, because she says her father was really fond of Remington's work and she knew it well. So it's just interesting to see these things as they popped up. And of course, you can see Wallis's Bronco Buster there on the credenza. Thank you. It's interesting to note. I really think that Wallis was buying these works because he was really interested in Remington's work and thinking about those kind of visualizations in much the same way John Ford was, but different, of course. But Wallis had a much larger collection, as did his second wife, Martha Heyer. Next slide. And these are images from a Life magazine article about Heyer. But when Heyer's film started to take off, she began collecting and acquiring original works by George Rouault, Paul Gauguin, Maurice Utrio, Camille Pissarro, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. So she was already really into art when she met Wallis. And by the late 1960s, Wallis started really buying art in earnest. And I've been through the papers and I've seen all the things he was looking at, from Giacometti's to Henry Moore's to Monet's. It was really quite a fascinating look at his collection. If we could move to the next. And I just picked a few of the more important works from what eventually became their collection. This is pretty good collection. They did some nice work putting these things together. And just one description of their house at 515 South Mapleton Drive. It said they're beyond being their living room, their house was a blend of styles, evoking a country house with 17th and 18th century furnishings. And in one corner, Monet's chrysanthemums overlooked a Regency commode, and another, Renoir's young girl with a flowered hat seemed to smile down on a Louis XV chess table. An attenuated Giacometti faced a Degas bronze nude. The combination of paintings and sculptures and furnishings blended in such a way as to enfold a guest within the embrace of art. So I think it's just interesting to keep in mind that this was a very art-centric household that they created together, or I should say multiple households. Because an interesting part of this story is that Martha, while she was in charge of multiple residences and she was accustomed to living quite extravagantly, she got herself into some money issues. And when she chose to take out loans through some unscrupulous characters who took advantage of her situation, she got into even more trouble. And in the end, she wound up putting down as collateral on a $1.2 million loan debt the Monet Houses of Parliament and the Gauguin Brittany scene that you see over there. Can we go to the next slide? So the two at the top were put down as collateral, and two of the guys that she gave these paintings over to took them to Wildenstein in New York and sold them. And so then she knew she was pretty much in trouble and didn't know a way out of this. Now, I don't know exactly how they fit in, and I've not been able to discern this yet. But one article says that two Remington oils, which did include a misdeal, I'm quite positive, were also sold, as it is noted in one of the articles, that they were later returned by the FBI. So it wasn't just the Impressionist works, but the Remingtons got caught up in the kerfuffle as well. And once Wallis got involved, he was determined to get the pictures back. And so he struck a deal with Wildenstein, who agreed to sell them back to Wallis in return for an agreement that Wildenstein would be the selling agent if the works were ever sold in the future. This is going to get them into trouble again. Um, so there's some notes that Wildenstein actually held out in an attempt to keep the works, but they finally did return them to Hal Wallis. And in 1986, Wallis gifted the Gauguin painting to LA County Museum. Now, Wallis passes in 1988, and the Impressionist paintings were given over to be exhibited as at LACMA. And LACMA thought of these works as a gift. They understood that the loan of the paintings was not just the museum understood that the loan of the paintings was a gift, and it would be for an indefinite period of time. There was a lot of dispute over the way that they read this, but after 2 years of the paintings being on view at LACMA, the foundation decided to sell the works, which greatly accrued in value since they were purchased. And at that point, it became a legal suit between the museum and the foundation. But interestingly enough, then of course Wildenstein finds out about it, and they get involved in the suit too because they say they had the right to sell the pictures. So it's really quite confusing. But the most interesting thing to me was after going through all of the papers at the Herrick Library, and really reading Wallis's correspondence with the director from LACMA over the years, and the fact that LACMA held a retrospective of Wallis's work in film in 1974. I can kind of understand why the museum really thought they had established a relationship and really thought these paintings were going to come to them. This is also at a moment for LA County Museum that they had just lost the Arm & Hammer collection the year before. And so it's just, there's a lot going on there, and it's an ugly situation. Anyway, in the end, the foundation was allowed to go forward with the sale. And in 1989, the works sold for a total of $39.6 million. And one of the best things that came out of this that I think is kind of buried in the history, it's kind of hard, it was kind of hard to find and figure out, but the Wallis Foundation did set up a fund for LA County Museum to purchase works of art, and they have purchased some really amazing Cézannes and other works that have filled in the gaps for what they didn't have from this collection. Now, back to Remington. As we were changing out the show, we got a phone call from an art dealer, antiques dealer in Pasadena. And then he sent an email on to me shortly after that. And I was downstairs working on the exhibition. And I came back up and found this email with the image that you see on the left. I've cropped it a little bit. It wasn't a very straight on image. But the email basically said to me, I found the frames, the original frames for a Misdeal. And I was like, oh, what in the world? And funny enough, if we look at this and we look back to All in a Night's work, it certainly looks like the frame that we have in the picture. And it's definitely different than the frame that Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks had on the painting, which still doesn't look like an original Remington frame to me. So what I think we have here is, and oh, if you'll notice all these horrible tears and everything in the painting itself. So this is like a nice high quality reproduction, probably made around 1980 after this whole debacle with the collection with Martha Heyer and the selling of the Remingtons and the getting back of the Remingtons. So what it seems like has happened is that they kept the frames, they got reproductions made of the two works, and then they sold the works on the market because the works go into a private collection here in Fort Worth in the early 1980s. And so interestingly enough, our story is kind of coming to an end, but if you'll go to the last slide, what was really fascinating also to me, I really know we've got the frame that the painting originally lived in for at least from the 1950s up until around 1980, because on the back of the frame that the antique dealer was very nice to share with me, the images of the labels from the different places that it had traveled. And I've read all the correspondence on these, so it corresponds clearly to the kind of loans that Wallis was making of his Remington paintings in this time period. So the LA County Museum in 75, he went to Cody in 74, and then out to the Palm Springs Desert Museum, which is today this Palm Springs Museum of Art. So just a really fascinating story. And like I say, fortunate for us that the painting found its way to our private collection here in Texas, and also very lucky for us, its current owner was happy for us to borrow it for use in this particular exhibition. And with that, I conclude the story of Remington's painting, A Misdeal, and its role in Hollywood history.